My name is Lara. I'm 34, a single mom, a barista by morning, a motel receptionist by night. I live in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town with my son Luca. He's 8, my whole world. Life isn't glamorous. It's rent notices, thrift store jeans, and coffee stains that never wash out. But every night when Luca hugs me and says, "Good night, superhero," I remember who I really am. Not a failure, not a burden. Just his mom. And for now, that's enough. I never thought humiliation could come wrapped in silk and champagne. There I was sitting in the 3rd row at my sister's wedding, wearing the only dress I owned, trying to blend into a room full of perfect people. My son Luca sat beside me in a little suit. I stretched 2 paychecks for thinking today would make us feel like family again. But when Vivian raised her glass, her smile glowing under the lights, I didn't expect her speech to turn me into a punchline, and I definitely didn't expect the only person to stand up for me would be her groom, the man who was supposed to be her fairy tale ending. I never thought humiliation could come wrapped in silk and champagne. The room smelled like expensive flowers, white roses, peonies, lilies arranged in crystal vases, so tall, they blocked half my view of the altar. Golden cutlery gleamed under chandeliers the size of small cars. Everywhere I looked, people stood in perfect little groups, dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits, sipping champagne as if it were water. Their laughter rose and fell like rehearsed music, effortless and cold. I sat in the 3rd row clutching my purse like it was an anchor, keeping me from drifting away. My dress, navy blue with a slightly faded hem, was the only formal dress I owned. I'd ironed it twice that morning, praying the old zipper wouldn't give out halfway through the ceremony. The heels pinched my toes, but at least they matched. Sort of. Beside me, Luca swung his legs under the chair, humming under his breath. His little suit, black with a silver tie, was a size too big around the shoulders and tight around the wrists. I'd stretched 2 paychecks for it, skipping lunches at work and pulling extra shifts to cover the rental cost. But seeing him there, cheeks flushed with pride, hair slicked back with the cheap gel he insisted on using, I almost believed the expense was worth it. He turned to me and grinned, revealing the tiny gap where his front tooth had fallen out last week. "Mama," he whispered, eyes wide with wonder. "Do you think Aunt Vivian will look like a real princess?" I swallowed the tightness in my throat and smiled back. "I'm sure she will, baby." He nodded solemnly and turned back to the aisle, clutching the small toy car hidden in his pocket, as if it were a secret talisman against the intimidating grandeur around us. The ceremony music shifted, the string quartet swelling into a triumphant chord. Everyone stood, heads turned, phones rose in synchrony. And there she was, Vivian. My younger sister floated down the aisle like she'd stepped out of a bridal magazine, her veil trailing behind her like morning mist over water. The dress was fitted silk embroidered with tiny crystals that caught the chandelier light and scattered it in glittering shards across the room. Her hair was curled into a flawless bun, crowned with a tiara of delicate pearls. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look overwhelmed. She looked like a queen claiming her throne. People gasped softly. Cameras clicked. Judith, our mother, dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her face glowing with pride so sharp it nearly burned. I watched Vivian glide past me, her perfume trailing hints of jasmine and rose. For a fleeting second, her eyes flicked in my direction. Her smile faltered just slightly before she pulled it back into place, radiant and unbreakable. "You made it," she murmured under her breath so only I could hear. Her gaze shifted to Luca and softened. "He's getting big." Then she was gone, continuing down the aisle toward her perfect future, leaving me in her shadow, like she always had. I sank back into my seat as the guests sat down in a synchronized hush. Luca leaned against me, still watching his aunt with unfiltered adoration. "She's so pretty," he whispered. "Yeah," I said, quietly smoothing his hair back. "She is." The officiant began to speak, his voice echoing off marble walls and crystal. I tried to focus on his words, but my eyes kept drifting. The guests, the flowers, the shining floor. The way everything looked so effortlessly beautiful, so far removed from the life Luca and I lived. I thought of our little apartment on the edge of town. The second-hand curtains that didn't quite match, the chipped plates I bought from a thrift store, the stack of bills under the fruit bowl. I wondered if anyone here had ever worried about rent, or if the fridge would last another month, or whether their kids' sneakers would survive another growth spurt. Probably not. I shifted in my seat, feeling the seams of my dress strain around my ribcage. The ceremony continued. Vows were exchanged. Tears were wiped away. Applause rippled through the room when Vivian and Callum kissed under the arch of roses. She looked so happy. He looked steady, solid, a man carved out of quiet marble. Everyone stood and cheered. Luca clapped too hard, his little palms bright red, as he beamed at the couple. "Are we going to the party now?" he asked eagerly as people began filing out for the reception hall. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "We are." He bounced ahead, weaving through the sea of sequins and polished shoes, his toy car still clutched tight in his pocket. I walked behind him slowly, my heels clicking on the marble floor, echoing louder than I wanted them to. Each step felt like walking deeper into a place I didn't belong, a place that had always made sure I knew it. But today wasn't about me. It was about Vivian, her day, her fairy tale, her beginning. And I was just here to watch it unfold from the shadows. As the guests drifted out of the ceremony hall and into the reception area, I walked behind Luca, watching him skip along the polished marble floors, nearly colliding with a waiter carrying a tower of champagne glasses. "Careful, baby," I said softly, reaching out to steady him. Sorry, he squeaked to the waiter, then turned back to me, eyes wide. "Do you think there will be cake soon?" I smiled faintly, brushing a crumb off his lapel. "There's always cake at weddings." He nodded satisfied and darted ahead again, weaving through glittering gowns and dark suits. I followed slowly, my feet aching in my too tight heels, my chest tight with something heavier than exhaustion. The reception hall was even more beautiful than the chapel white roses cascading down tall gold stands, crystal chandeliers dripping light onto tables covered in ivory linen. Everywhere I looked, people were laughing, hugging, greeting each other like a polished family reunion. I found our table. Table 9. Near the bathrooms, tucked against the wall like an afterthought. I slid into my seat and exhaled, feeling the weight of the day settle into my bones. Across the room, Vivian floated from guest to guest, her dress shimmering under the lights. She laughed easily, posed for photos, kissed Callum's cheek, as guests snapped pictures for their Instagram stories. She looked perfect. She always had. Even as kids, Vivian had a glow about her that drew people in. Teachers loved her. Boys followed her like moths to a flame. And my mother adored her, like she was some rare jewel, too precious to touch. If Vivian sneezed, my mother would bless her with a silk handkerchief. If I coughed, she told me to drink water and stop being dramatic. I watched my sister, now smiling at the way she tipped her head back, when she laughed, her hand resting lightly on Callum's chest, as if she were claiming him before the entire world. "You okay?" Mama Luca asked, tugging at my sleeve. I blinked and looked down. His brown eyes, so much like mine, searched my face with quiet concern. "I'm fine, baby," I said, brushing his hair back. "Go ahead and eat your salad." He made a face at the lettuce, but obeyed, stabbing at it with his little fork. I looked back at Vivian. She caught my gaze for half a second. Her smile didn't falter. It just didn't reach her eyes. Then she turned away, pulled into another conversation, another orbit, where I didn't belong. And in that moment, sitting at a table near the restrooms next to a flickering sconce light and the faint smell of bleach wafting from the bathrooms, it hit me. People think being the older sister means you lead the way, that you're someone to look up to. But in my family, I wasn't a role model. I was a warning, a cautionary tale about what happens when you fall in love too young, when you believe promises whispered in the dark when you keep a baby instead of starting over fresh and clean, when you work 2 jobs and come to weddings wearing rental dresses and pay later shoes. And yet, looking at Luca, his cheeks pink from excitement, his hair sticking up where I'd missed a spot with the gel, I felt a small flicker of something stubborn and quiet inside me. Maybe being a warning wasn't the worst thing. Maybe it meant I'd lived enough to have something real to say. But deep down, the truth pulsed under my ribs like a bruise. In this family, strength didn't matter. Appearance did. Vivian had beauty, charm, success, all the things our mother valued, all the things I never had. I'd spent years wondering if someday they'd see me as more than my mistakes, more than the single mom who didn't belong in photos, more than the sister who clapped from the shadows. I'd hoped today might be that day, that somehow showing up would be enough. But as the music swelled and Vivian stepped up to the microphone, her smile brilliant under the chandeliers, I felt it in my bones. This wasn't going to be the day they saw me. This was going to be the day they reminded me exactly where I stood. My name is Lara. I'm 34 years old, a single mom, and the family disappointment. Most mornings I wake up at 4:30 a.m. The world is still dark silent except for the hum of the fridge and Luca's quiet breathing down the hall. I make coffee in a chipped white mug that says, "World's Best Mom," in fading pink letters. It was a Mother's Day gift from him last year, bought at the school fundraiser with his saved-up quarters. By 5:15, I'm out the door walking down cracked sidewalks to the cafe 2 blocks away. I open with Sam, who's 65 and smokes 2 cigarettes, before we even unlock the front doors. He calls me kiddo and pretends he doesn't see when I slip an extra muffin into my bag for Luca's lunchbox. I work there until noon, scrubbing coffee stains from counters and smiling at customers who don't look up from their phones. Then I go home for a few hours, wash uniforms, prep dinner, help Luca with his reading homework if he's home from school, before I leave again. My second job is at a small hotel off the highway. I work the front desk from 4 p.m. to midnight, checking in weary travelers, answering phones, restocking the lobby coffee machine. Some nights I get lucky, and it's quiet. Other nights drunks stumble in slurring complaints about room keys that don't work or towels that smell like bleach. I get home around 12:30 a.m., tiptoe into Luca's room to watch him sleep, brush my teeth and crawl into bed for 4 hours before it starts all over again. Life isn't glamorous. It isn't easy, but it's mine. I know how to patch Luca's jeans when he rips the knees at recess. I know the exact temperature he likes his hot chocolate. I know he hates celery, loves dinosaurs, and wants to be an astronaut when he grows up. He tells me I'm his superhero, and most days that's enough to keep me going. But being a single mom in my family meant being the one who failed. My mother Judith never forgave me for it. She believes in appearances above all else. When I was 25, newly in love with a man who told me he wanted forever, she smiled politely at him over Christmas dinner. By May, he was gone. No note, no calls, just vanished like smoke from a blown-out candle. Judith didn't ask questions. She didn't offer help. She just pursed her lips and said, "I told you so." She believes a woman's worth is measured by the man who chooses her. And since no one chose me, she decided I had no worth at all. Then there's Vivian, my little sister. 5 years younger, taller, thinner, with hair that curls perfectly without effort. She's always been beautiful, the kind of beautiful that makes people stare when she walks into a room. And she knows it. Growing up, she got everything she wanted. Ballet classes, braces, singing lessons, trips to Disneyland. I got secondhand clothes, a pat on the shoulder, and reminders to be grateful Vivian didn't ruin her dresses before I inherited them. If Vivian sneezed, Judith would press a silk handkerchief to her nose and fuss about her catching a cold. If I got sick, Judith would toss a bottle of vitamins at me and tell me to stop being dramatic. Vivian graduated college with honors. Judith threw her a garden party with fairy lights and a jazz quartet. When I graduated community college with Luca balanced on my hip, Judith didn't come. She said she was busy with a charity luncheon. When I got Vivian's wedding invitation in the mail, the envelope spelled my name wrong. Laura with an O. The RSVP card said +1, but I wasn't sure if Luca counted. I checked the box anyway, then taped the invitation to our fridge with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. I told myself we would go for closure. That maybe this was my family's quiet way of inviting me back into the fold. The venue today is beautiful. White roses everywhere, tablecloths, pressed crisp and smooth. A string quartet plays near the fountain music, floating into the warm June air like a promise. Vivian looks like she belongs here, a walking bridal advertisement. Her hair pulled into a perfect bun, makeup glowing diamond earrings catching every flicker of light. When she saw me before the ceremony, her eyes widened slightly. "You made it," she said like she hadn't expected me to. Her gaze drifted to Luca and softened for half a second. He's getting big. No hug, no warmth. Just words floating between us like perfume before she drifted off to greet other guests. Judith didn't acknowledge me at all. She walked right past her floral dress swishing around her knees, eyes scanning the room for someone more important to greet. To her, I wasn't family today. I wasn't anything at all. But Luca was happy. He stared up at the chandelier like it was a spaceship, whispered that Vivian looked like a princess. He didn't notice the way people's eyes slid over me and away again, like looking too long might make them uncomfortable. I told myself I could survive the reception. I'd done it before. Holidays, birthdays, family gatherings where my presence felt like an inconvenience. I could sit in my little corner, eat my salad, and leave quietly after the cake was served. That was the plan, until Vivian picked up the microphone. And I realized today wasn't about forgiveness or healing or closure. Today was going to be another stage for Vivian to shine, and I was about to become her punchline. The clinking of glasses echoed through the reception hall as Vivian stood, her silhouette glowing under the chandelier. She held the microphone lightly like it weighed nothing, her French manicured fingers wrapped around the stem of her crystal champagne flute. Conversations hushed, chairs scraped, all eyes turned to her. She smiled that flawless, camera-ready smile and waited just long enough for the anticipation to build. It was a smile I knew well, the one that always meant she was about to take center stage. "I just want to thank everyone for coming today." She began, her voice sweet and confident, carrying across the tables. "It means the world to Callum and me to have you here to celebrate our love." Scattered applause rose around the room. Someone let out a soft, "Oh." Vivian tilted her head toward Callum, her veil catching the light like spun sugar. He smiled back, polite and steady, but his eyes didn't quite reach hers. And of course, she continued shifting her weight, so her gown shimmered around her like liquid silver. "I want to take a moment to say something about my big sister." My heart stopped for a beat. Across the table, Luca's head snapped up, his forkful of salad hovering midair. His eyes widened with excitement. "She's talking about you, Mama," he whispered, smiling brightly. I forced my lips into a polite smile, though my stomach clenched with something cold and familiar. Vivian's gaze swept the room before landing on me. "Lara has always been such a strong example for me," she said, her voice dripping with affection that felt too smooth, too sharp. "She's brave. She raised a child all by herself. No husband, no partner, just her. And well, whoever was kind enough to babysit when she couldn't." Soft laughter rippled across the tables. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, my ears buzzing. My fingers curled into the napkin on my lap. Vivian laughed lightly along with the guests, then continued. "But seriously, it's incredible, isn't it? She's managed to come all this way, show up here today, despite everything." The laughter grew louder, freer, like the room had been waiting for permission to let go. Judith cackled from her table near the head, her voice slicing through the din. "She's a used product," she chimed in, "but at least she still polishes up well." Laughter erupted sharper this time, tinged with cruelty, that made my chest tighten until I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the hall, leaving only that sound, that cutting, humiliating sound. I blinked hard, willing the tears to stay hidden. My vision blurred as I glanced at Luca. His small face was scrunched in confusion, his eyebrows knitting together as he looked around at the laughing guests. "Mama," he whispered, tugging on my sleeve, his voice trembling. "Why did she say that about you?" The music continued softly in the background, violins filling the silence that stretched inside me. My throat burned as I swallowed back the sob clawing its way up. I tried to answer him, to tell him it was nothing, that it didn't matter, that it was just a joke. But my mouth wouldn't move. Vivian's smile remained frozen under the chandelier light. She looked radiant, beautiful, victorious. I looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to meet my eyes and break the spell. My cousin pretended to scroll on her phone. My uncle shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Even Grandpa Norman, who used to call me his little lion when I was a girl, stared down at his folded hands. I was alone. Not just alone in the room, alone in the way that cuts deeper, the realization that no one sees you, not really. They see the story they've written about you, the disappointment, the failure, the woman who made her own bed and now had to lie in it. And worst of all, Luca was watching his mother, the woman who kissed his scraped knees, who stayed up late to help with his math homework, who made dinosaur-shaped pancakes on Saturdays, sit frozen while the people who were supposed to be family laughed at her pain. In that moment, humiliation tasted like bile and roses. My chest ached with the urge to stand, to scream, to tell them they didn't know a fraction of what I'd carried, what I'd survived. But my legs wouldn't move. My lips stayed pressed together in a thin line. I looked at Luca again. His eyes were wide, glossy, with tears he didn't understand. That broke me more than any word Vivian or Judith could ever say. I could have left. I could have grabbed his hand, walked out with my head held high, let them whisper and laugh as I went. But before I could even reach for him, I heard a chair scrape back across the polished floor. The sound cut through the laughter like a blade. Callum stood up, slowly, deliberately, his tall frame rising above the guests. The room fell silent, the laughter dying like a candle snuffed out by wind. He didn't look at Vivian. He didn't look at Judith. His eyes locked onto mine, steady and unreadable. In that frozen moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Something was about to happen. Not a rescue, not a defense, a reckoning. The room was silent. Callum stood there, one hand braced against the back of his chair, the other loosely curled at his side. His eyes were locked on mine, dark and unreadable under the reception lights. For a brief, fleeting second, I wondered if he would smile, Say something charming to brush away the awkwardness. That was what people did in my family. Smoothed over cruelty with polite laughter and quick toasts. But he didn't smile. He didn't look away. I felt my pulse thunder in my ears as heat crawled up my neck. My fingers clenched tighter around the napkin in my lap until I thought it might tear. Luca tugged my sleeve again. "Mama, are you okay?" I blinked down at him at his wide brown eyes filled with confusion and something that twisted deeper fear. Not fear of the room or Vivian or Judith. Fear for me. Fear that something had happened to his mother and he didn't know how to fix it. I swallowed hard, my throat burning like I'd swallowed acid. I wanted to say I'm fine, baby, but the words stuck somewhere between my chest and my lips. The reception hall seemed to close in around me. The chandeliers glowed too bright, the laughter still echoing in the back of my mind, like a ghost that wouldn't leave. I could feel every stare digging into my skin, curious, pitying, amused, indifferent. I wanted to stand, to leave, to grab Luca's hand and walk out with my dignity intact before someone else decided to strip it away. My muscles tensed to move to push my chair back to rise, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. They trembled under the table, weak with the weight of humiliation and years of silent endurance. I felt rooted to my chair, trapped between shame and anger, between wanting to disappear and wanting to stand tall. I imagined myself standing up and speaking, telling Vivian she didn't know the first thing about strength, telling Judith that motherhood wasn't measured by marriage certificates, telling every single guest at that wedding that I wasn't their pity project or their moral cautionary tale. But then I looked down at Luca. His small hand rested on my knee, his fingers gripping the fabric of my dress. His eyes were pleading silently, begging me to make this okay, to turn the world right side up again. And suddenly, all that imagined bravery felt useless, because words wouldn't erase what he'd just heard. Nothing I said would change how they saw me. Nothing I said would change the way he'd remember this moment for the rest of his life, watching his mother shrink, while strangers laughed. My chest tightened with panic. Air wouldn't fill my lungs. My vision blurred at the edges as my mind raced. Leave now. Save yourself. Save him. Stay. Endure it. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you run. Speak up. Say something. Anything. But what could I say that wouldn't sound like desperation? Like begging for dignity they'd already decided I didn't deserve. Callum shifted, stepping away from the table. His jaw was tight, his eyes still locked on mine. I could see something burning there, anger, yes, but also disappointment. And underneath that, something softer, something that made my chest ache. I tore my gaze away from him and looked around the room. Judith was dabbing her lips with her napkin, unbothered, already reaching for her glass of white wine. Vivian sat with perfect posture, her smile smug and unbroken, as guests murmured in her ear. No one was going to stand up for me. No one was going to say enough, except maybe me. My heart pounded as I sucked in a shaky breath. I could feel Luca watching, his hand squeezing tighter around mine now. "Mama," he whispered, his voice small and trembling. "Are we leaving?" I looked at him, at his little suit that didn't quite fit, at his flushed cheeks and shining eyes, and I felt the sharp snap of resolve pierce through my fog of humiliation. "Yes, baby," I whispered back, my voice shaking. "We're leaving." I pushed my chair back, the screech of wood on polished floor, slicing through the silence like a scream. Heads turned, whispers rose. I stood slowly, feeling every tremble in my knees, every hot flush of shame rushing to my cheeks. Part of me wanted to run, to gather Luca into my arms and flee that golden hall and its suffocating, glittering cruelty. Part of me wanted to stay, to plant my feet on the marble and let them watch me refuse to bow. But before I could decide, Callum moved. He stepped forward, shoulders squared, his tall frame cutting a path through the stunned guests. The microphone trembled slightly in his hand. His gaze shifted from me to Vivian, and then to the crowd. He lifted the mic to his lips, his voice low, steady, carrying across the tables with quiet power. "I can't pretend I'm okay with what just happened," he said, his words dropping like stones into a silent pond. "And I won't stand here and let cruelty pass as comedy." The guests froze. Vivian's smile faltered. Judith's eyes narrowed. My heart pounded harder. Callum turned and his eyes found mine again. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just looked at me. And in that look, I saw it. This wasn't just about me. This was about him, about Luca, about every person who had ever been laughed at by people who claimed to love them. And in that moment, standing between my son and my shame, with Callum's gaze locked onto mine and the whole room holding its breath, I realized something. I didn't need to choose whether to stay or go. Because whatever happened next, my life was never going to be the same again. The room felt colder now, as if Callum's words had stripped away the warm illusion of fairy lights and rose petals, leaving behind only marble floors and people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Vivian sat frozen, her smile cracking at the edges like porcelain under too much heat. Judith's lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line as she set down her wineglass with a sharp clink. Callum didn't flinch. He stood tall in his dark suit, the microphone held loosely at his side. His shoulders were rigid with tension, but his face remained calm, controlled, except for his eyes. His eyes burned. "I've heard a lot about family," he said, his voice low but clear, carrying through the silent hall. "About tradition, loyalty, keeping up appearances." He paused, scanning the tables, looking at each guest in turn. Some dropped their gazes to their drinks. Others shifted in their seats, fidgeting with napkins or jewelry. But what I just saw... His jaw clenched for a beat before he continued. That wasn't family. That was mockery dressed up as celebration. A ripple went through the room, a faint gasp, the sharp inhale of people caught off guard by truth, spoken too plainly. Vivian's eyes widened. "Callum," she said quickly, her voice pitched high with warning. It was just a joke. He didn't look at her. Instead, he turned to me. For the first time that night, I saw him fully. The quiet strength in the set of his shoulders, the faint shadow of exhaustion under his eyes, the sadness in the tight line of his mouth. "You mocked your sister," he said, his voice softer now, but no less firm. "You mocked her for being a single mother, for raising her son without help. You laughed at her strength and called it failure." His gaze shifted briefly to Luca, who sat frozen in his chair, clutching the edge of the table with white-knuckled fingers. Then Callum looked back at me, and I felt my throat tighten. "She didn't ask to be put in that position," he said, shaking his head slightly. "But she showed up today." She smiled. "She sat here and clapped for you, and you turned that into a punchline." Vivian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support. But the guests remained silent, stunned into stillness. Callum turned back to the crowd, raising the microphone slightly. His voice was clear, steady, unapologetic. "If this is what family means to you," he said, each word crisp as glass breaking. "If this is what loyalty looks like, then I need to reconsider what kind of man I want to be." A sharp intake of breath spread across the tables. Someone dropped a fork onto their plate with a clatter that echoed like thunder in the silence. Judith stood abruptly, her chair screeching back against the floor. "Callum, sit down this instant," she snapped, her voice trembling with fury and fear. But he ignored her. Instead, he walked around the head table, stepping down onto the floor. His shoes thudded dully against the marble as he approached where Luca and I sat. For a moment, I thought he would stop in front of me, say something quiet, maybe offer comfort I didn't know how to accept. But he didn't stop. He crouched down, lowering himself to Luca's eye level. The room seemed to blur and narrow, everything fading, except the sight of Callum, tall and strong, kneeling before my son. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, his voice gentle in a way that sliced something open in my chest. "Your mom. She's the strongest person in this room. Don't ever forget that." Luca blinked his eyes, filling with tears. He tried to blink away. Slowly, hesitantly, he nodded. Callum stood turned back to the crowd one final time and spoke with quiet finality. "I think I've seen enough." Then he set the microphone down on the nearest table, the sound of it resting against linen and cutlery, echoing in the silent hall. Without another word, he walked past Vivian, past Judith, past the stunned guests, and out through the reception doors. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The string quartet sat frozen bows hovering above strings. The waiters stood by the champagne tower, eyes wide with disbelief. The guests shifted, glancing at each other, unsure whether to applaud, gasp, or pretend nothing had happened. I sat there trembling. Luca's small hand clutching mine so tightly it hurt. My heart thundered in my chest, shaking something loose inside me, something that had been locked away for years. Vivian's face was pale now. Her lips parted, her eyes glazed over with shock. Judith opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She simply sat there, gripping the tablecloth, like it might anchor her to the world that had just cracked open beneath her. In that instant, I felt it. The shift. The moment where everything changes. The moment where the woman who spent her life shrinking to fit someone else's comfort finally feels the walls fall away. I stood slowly, my legs trembling, but strong beneath me. Luca looked up at me, his eyes wide, and whispered, "Are we leaving, Mama?" I squeezed his hand, tears brimming, but refusing to fall. "Yeah, baby," I said softly. "We're leaving." And as we stepped away from table 9, past guests who parted to let us through, past a mother who would never understand love that didn't come with conditions, past a sister who would never understand strength that didn't need applause, I felt something bloom in my chest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one walking away, ashamed. The night air was cool against my burning cheeks as Luca and I stepped out of the reception hall. The soft hum of distant traffic mixed with the faint strains of music still leaking through the gilded doors behind us. For a moment, I just stood there under the dark velvet sky, breathing in the quiet. My chest rose and fell with shaky relief. I hadn't realized how hard it had been to breathe in that room until I stepped out of it. Luca squeezed my hand. His little fingers were cold damp with sweat, but his grip was firm, steady, stronger than I expected from someone so small. "Are you okay, Mama?" he asked softly, his eyes searching mine in the dim light from the ornate lanterns lining the pathway. I crouched down to his level, brushing his hair back, feeling the cheap gel still stiff under my fingertips. "I'm okay," I whispered, my voice trembling despite myself. "Are you okay?" He nodded, though his lip quivered. Tears pooled in his eyes, reflecting the golden glow of the lanterns. "Why did they laugh at you?" "You're not bad. You're the best mom." A sob rose in my throat, sharp and sudden, but I swallowed it down. I cupped his cheeks in my hands, forcing myself to smile. "Thank you, baby. That means more to me than anything they could ever say." He threw his arms around my neck, hugging me so tightly I almost lost my balance. I closed my eyes, breathing in the warmth and softness of him, letting it anchor me back into my body. When I finally stood brushing gravel from my knees, I glanced back at the tall glass doors. Through them, I could still see Vivian's gown glinting under the chandeliers, could still see guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats, whispering behind manicured hands. But the scene felt far away now, smaller somehow. I turned away from it, from them. "Come on," I said, squeezing Luca's hand again. "Let's go home." We walked slowly through the parking lot, the night wrapping around us like a blanket. Luca swung our clasped hands between us, silent for a long time. Then he spoke again, his voice small and thoughtful. "Mama, that man Callum, he's brave." "Yeah," I said, my chest tightening with something bittersweet. "Yeah, he is." He said, "You're strong." I swallowed my throat, aching with unshed tears. "Do you think that's true?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Luca stopped walking and turned to look up at me. Under the dim glow of the parking lot lights, his eyes shone with fierce certainty. "You're the strongest person I know." I blinked rapidly, the tears finally spilling over. I let out a shaky laugh and ruffled his hair, blinking up at the sky to keep myself from sobbing outright. The stars were faint, washed out by city light, but they were still there, quiet and constant. As we reached my old rust-spotted sedan, Luca tugged my sleeve again. "Mama, yeah, baby. That man Callum. Is he gonna be okay?" He looked sad. I paused, unlocking the car and helping him climb into the back seat. As I buckled his belt, I thought of Callum's eyes, steady, sad, angry kind. I thought of how he'd looked at me, not with pity, not with judgment, but with something that felt dangerously close to understanding. "I think," I said, softly smoothing his hair back, "one more time, I think he'll be okay." "Because he did the right thing." Luca nodded as if that answer made sense in his small universe, where right and wrong were still black and white. I closed his door and slid into the driver's seat, gripping the worn leather steering wheel, until my knuckles turned white. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My mascara had smudged under my eyes, my hair was frizzing at the temples, and the neckline of my dress was creased. I looked tired, older than I felt. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. Because tonight, someone saw me. Not as a cautionary tale, not as a failure, not as a joke, but as a woman who had survived, who had kept going, when it would have been easier to collapse. And even if it only lasted a moment, even if it came from someone who wasn't mine to keep it, was enough to remind me I didn't need their approval to be worth something. I started the car, the engine rumbling to life. Luca leaned forward in his seat, resting his chin on his knees, watching me in the mirror, with sleepy, adoring eyes. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow morning?" he asked, his voice slurred with exhaustion. I smiled, tears still clinging to my lashes. "Yeah, baby, we can have pancakes." As I drove us home through quiet streets and blinking traffic lights, I thought about Callum. About his calm voice cutting through the cruelty like a blade of truth. About the sadness in his eyes. About the way he'd looked at Luca and called me strong. Somewhere in the city, he was alone too. Alone but brave enough to speak when it mattered. And for the first time, I realized strength didn't always look like fighting back with fists or shouting down your enemies. Sometimes strength looked like a tired single mom driving her son home at midnight with dignity still intact. Sometimes strength looked like a little boy who believed in his mother more fiercely than anyone else. And sometimes strength looked like a man in a wedding suit, standing up and saying, "No, not today." Inside the reception hall, silence settled like thick fog after Callum walked out. No music played. The chandeliers still glowed, illuminating faces, frozen between shock confusion and second-hand shame. Vivian stood at the head table, clutching her champagne flute so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Her perfect posture sagged under the weight of what had just happened. She looked around, searching for someone to restore the moment, to brush it off with laughter or a quick change of subject. But no one spoke. Judith broke first. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished marble floor like a scream. What an ungrateful boy, she snapped, her voice trembling with rage. He embarrassed you in front of everyone. Typical, just like your sister. Selfish. Her words fell flat, swallowed by the stunned hush. People shifted in their seats, avoiding her eyes. Even Vivian didn't respond. She just stood there, breathing hard, her flawless makeup cracking under the reception lights. Across the room, the DJ hovered near his booth, uncertain, his fingers ghosting over the playlist. A waiter cleared his throat softly, stacking dessert plates with trembling hands. Finally, Vivian slammed her champagne flute down on the table. The sharp crack of crystal against glass made several guests jump. "Get him back here," she hissed to no one in particular. "This is my wedding. He can't just walk out like that." But no one moved. At the back of the room, her bridesmaids stood frozen pastel dresses, shimmering like spun sugar. One of them, a tall girl with dark curls, spoke up, her voice hesitant. "Vivian, maybe you should apologize." Vivian spun toward her, eyes wide with disbelief. Apologize for what? It was a joke. People are too sensitive these days. But her voice wavered thin and sharp at the edges. A man cleared his throat near the front. Uncle Robert, a broad-shouldered man with a soft belly and kinder eyes than most. He shifted in his seat, glancing at his wife before speaking. "It didn't sound like a joke, Vivian. It sounded cruel." Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She shook her head, her curls trembling. "You're all overreacting." But her words tasted hollow even to herself. Judith stepped forward, placing a firm hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Darling," she said, her voice low and tight. "It doesn't matter what they think. He embarrassed us. We will fix this." Vivian swallowed her throat, working visibly. "How, Mother?" "He just walked out, in front of everyone. He ruined everything." Judith's expression hardened, her eyes cold and sharp like shards of glass. "Then you walk out too. Show them you don't need him." Vivian shook her head again, tears brimming now, threatening her perfect eyeliner. No, I need him. He's Callum." And in that moment, the guests saw it, the cracks in her facade, the desperation bleeding through her pride, the truth behind her carefully curated perfection. She didn't just want Callum for love. She wanted him because he made her look untouchable. Because his quiet, solid presence was the final puzzle piece in her curated life, the fairy tale ending she'd crafted and polished for years. But fairy tales don't survive truth. And tonight, Callum had ripped the veil away. At the entrance doors, Grandpa Norman stood with his cane pale and shaking. He'd watched it all from table 5, silent and small in his seat. Now he stepped forward, his steps uneven but determined. "Vivian," he said, his voice raspy with age and emotion. "You owe your sister an apology." Vivian turned to him, eyes wide with betrayal. "Grandpa." But he raised a trembling hand to stop her. "No. Enough. I've watched this family tear itself apart with pride and cruelty for decades. Your father would be ashamed." Silence swallowed the room again, deeper this time. A silence heavy with generational guilt, with truths buried for too long. Vivian's shoulders shook as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "But she always makes me feel small." Grandpa Norman shook his head sadly. "She never made you feel small. You felt small beside her strength." Vivian let out a strangled sob and sank into her chair, covering her face with her manicured hands. Judith reached for her, but Vivian flinched away, curling in on herself as the weight of the room pressed down. For the first time in her life, she looked human, fragile, small in a way no spotlight could hide. The guests sat in stunned quiet. Some whispered softly, others stared at their half-finished desserts. A few dabbed their eyes with napkins, and somewhere outside beyond the glowing doors and ivory roses, Callum walked alone into the night, his suit jacket draped over one arm. His tie loosened his face, lit by streetlights. He walked with purpose, but also with grief. Because standing up for truth costs something, it always does. But what it gives back is worth more. Dignity, integrity, a sliver of redemption. That night, social media buzzed with whispers from the guests. Videos leaked within hours. Comments flooded in, some calling Callum a hero, others calling him a coward for abandoning the wedding. But the ones that mattered most were simple. She deserved better. She didn't cry. She just stood up and left with her son. That's real strength. Sometimes the person who leaves isn't the one giving up. It's the one finally choosing themselves. And in their small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, Lara tucked Luca into bed, brushed his hair back from his forehead, and kissed him goodnight. He blinked sleepily up at her. "Mama, do you think Callum's okay?" She paused, her hand resting on his cheek. "Yeah, baby. I think he's better than okay." Because for the first time in years, she felt it too. Strength isn't staying quiet to keep the peace. Strength is knowing when to speak and when to walk away. Morning sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of our small apartment, casting pale gold patterns across the faded carpet. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, gone cold, staring at nothing. Luca was on the floor in his pajamas, humming softly to himself as he lined up his toy dinosaurs in a perfect crescent around his cereal bowl. Every so often he glanced up at me, his brow furrowed with quiet worry he didn't yet know how to name. Finally, his soft voice broke through my fog as he asked if I was sad. I blinked, looking at him. His messy hair, his sleepy eyes, his Spider-Man pajamas with the knees worn thin, and something loosened in my chest, a knot I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the night before. I told him no, I wasn't sad, and though my voice sounded steadier than I felt, I meant it. There was a lightness in my chest, a hollow space where shame used to live. The emptiness felt strange, but not bad. Like breathing deeply for the first time after holding your breath too long. My phone buzzed on the table, skittering against the wood. 56 notifications. Texts from unknown numbers, missed calls. Facebook messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. My hands trembled slightly as I opened one of the links sent by an old high school friend. It was a video. The thumbnail showed Callum standing in his dark suit, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with quiet fury. I pressed play. His low, calm voice poured from the tiny speakers, cutting through the morning silence like a blade, as he said that if this was what family meant, if this was what loyalty looked like, then he needed to reconsider what kind of man he wanted to be. The comments scrolled beneath the video faster than I could read. People called him a hero. Others wrote that single moms deserved better. Someone said they had goosebumps and hoped I knew how strong I was. Another said they cried watching it because I had walked out with dignity. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and unexpected, but I didn't cry out of sadness. I cried because for the first time in so long I felt seen. Not pitied, not judged, seen. Luca climbed into my lap, wrapping his small arms around my neck, his cereal breath warm against my cheek, whispering that it was okay because I was the strongest person ever. Like Wonder Woman, or maybe like a lion. I let out a shaky laugh, hugging him tighter, asking, "A lion, huh?" He nodded seriously, saying, "Yeah, strong and brave, even if people are mean." I kissed his forehead, breathing in the sweet, sticky smell of milk and sleep, and told him thank you, that I loved him so much. He beamed, wiggled off my lap, and returned to his dinosaurs. I watched him for a moment, feeling something deep and quiet settle in my chest. For years, I'd walked through rooms with my shoulders hunched, eyes lowered, apologizing for my existence without speaking a word. For years, I'd let their laughter define me, let their judgment carve scars into my self-worth. But watching that video, hearing Callum's words, seeing comments from strangers who understood pain like mine, something shifted. I realized I'd spent so long waiting for an apology that would never come, waiting for validation from people who had already decided who I was, waiting for permission to feel worthy. But worth isn't something anyone can give you. It's something you claim. I stood rinsing out my mug, the cold coffee swirling down the drain. The morning light felt warmer now, softer against my skin. Luca, still focused on his dinosaurs, asked if we could go to the park today. I smiled as I wiped my hands on a dish towel, telling him yes, we could. He cheered softly under his breath, arranging his T-Rex so it faced the window. I turned away, catching my reflection in the dark screen of the microwave. My hair was tangled. There were faint smudges under my eyes. I looked tired, older, worn, but I also looked strong. For the first time, I saw it, the quiet dignity in the set of my shoulders, the fierce protectiveness in my eyes, the calm resolve in the curve of my mouth. I wasn't waiting anymore. They could keep their golden halls and glittering chandeliers, their empty toasts and cruel laughter, their polished perfection built on shallow foundations. Because in my tiny kitchen, barefoot, with chipped coffee mugs and dinosaurs guarding cereal bowls, I had everything I needed: love, strength, and dignity that no one could ever take from me again. And somewhere out there, a man in a dark suit with sad, steady eyes walked away from a fairy tale wedding because he refused to stay silent, because he believed in something better, because he believed in someone like me. I didn't know what that meant for him, or for us, or for the future. But for now, it meant this. I was done living small. I was done letting them write my story. I was ready to roar. 2 days after the wedding, that never was, my phone rang while I was folding Luca's laundry. The name on the screen made my stomach twist, Judith. I hesitated. The folded t-shirts trembled slightly in my hands. Luca sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, building a Lego spaceship, humming quietly to himself. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting pale gold across his hair. The phone rang again. I pressed accept, holding it to my ear without speaking. For a moment, there was only silence. Then her voice, cold and clipped. "You embarrassed this family." I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. "Of course. Not how are you, not are you okay? Not, I'm sorry." "Did I?" I said quietly, smoothing the hem of Luca's dinosaur t-shirt on my knee. "You didn't have to stand there like a victim," she snapped. "You could have laughed it off, but instead you and that boy humiliated Vivian in front of everyone." "That boy?" I repeated, my voice shaking with a quiet rising anger I didn't bother to hide. "His name is Callum." Judith exhaled sharply. "It doesn't matter what his name is. He humiliated her. And you let him." I let out a soft laugh, bitter and hollow. "I didn't let him do anything. He chose to tell the truth." "Truth," she hissed. "The truth is, you're a single mother with nothing to your name. We protected you by keeping your shame private. But now the entire city knows about your situation." I felt my fingers curl tighter around the phone. My chest burned with a quiet fury, so deep and so old, it felt like an old friend. "Protected me," I whispered. "Is that what you think you were doing? Don't take that tone with me." "Lara," Judith snapped. "I raised you. I fed you. I gave you everything I could. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me like cold rain. They didn't pierce like they used to. They couldn't. Not anymore. "Maybe you did," I said softly. "But you never gave me kindness." Silence crackled on the line. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, like she was searching for words that would cut me back down to size. "I'm not your scapegoat anymore." I said, my voice calm and quiet and unbreakable. "You don't get to call me to ease your guilt or to blame me for your embarrassment. You raised Vivian. You made her who she is. That's on you, not me." "Lara," I hung up. The click echoed in my small kitchen so loud it startled Luca. He looked up from his Lego spaceship eyes, wide with concern. "Who was that mama?" he asked. I turned to him, forcing a small smile as I set the folded laundry aside. No one important. He studied me for a moment, then nodded, returning to his Legos with the unbothered focus only children possess. I stood there for a long time, staring at the quiet screen of my phone, feeling the tremble in my hands fade. My chest felt tight, but in a different way this time, not with fear or shame, but with a quiet, trembling relief. It was done. The conversation I'd rehearsed in my head for years, spoken and finished. No screaming, no tears. Just done. But Judith wasn't the only one closing in. That evening Vivian called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice poured through the speaker, thick with tears and fury. "How could you do this to me?" she cried. "Everyone thinks I'm some villain." "Callum left. The wedding's cancelled. Do you even care what you've done?" I closed my eyes, listening to her ragged breathing, the tears she didn't bother to hide. For a moment, guilt pricked at my chest. She was still my sister. She was still the girl who used to braid my hair before school, who slept curled against me during thunderstorms when we were little. But then I remembered her smile as she mocked me in front of hundreds of guests. I remembered Luca's confused, tearful eyes, and I realized whatever pity I felt wasn't enough to drown out the truth. I deleted her message without replying. The next day, Facebook and TikTok were still flooded with the video. Over 300,000 views now. People sharing it with hashtags like Stand Up for Single Moms and Wedding Truth Bomb. Strangers sent me private messages, women telling me they cried watching it. Men saying Callum's words challenged them to be better. Brothers, husbands, sons. But fame wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want applause. I didn't want virality. All I wanted was the quiet certainty I felt now as I walked Luca to school. The following morning, his small hand warm in mine. The sun rose pink and gold over the rooftops, and the breeze smelled like honeysuckle. Mama Luca said as we waited at the crosswalk, if someone is mean again, like Aunt Vivian, should I say something? I crouched down, smoothing his hair back, meeting his earnest, hopeful eyes. "You can, baby. But you don't have to. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away." He nodded solemnly, filing it away in his mind like another important life rule. The light turned green. We crossed together, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, his small steps quick and determined. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a warning. I felt like a lighthouse, standing steady, bright, unmoved by the tides crashing around me. Because the bad guys had closed in their words, sharp as daggers, their disappointment heavy as stone. But what they didn't know was this. I'd been forged in storms far worse than their judgment, and I was done letting them make me feel small. A week passed. The video faded from trending feeds. Other scandals took its place: a local politician, caught in a lie, a celebrity divorce, a viral prank that made people laugh until the next outrage arrived. That was how the world worked. Attention burned hot, then turned to ash. But the silence left behind felt colder than before. Judith hadn't called since that last conversation. Her absence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like punishment. Vivian blocked me on everything. The wedding photos vanished from her Instagram overnight, replaced by curated brunch selfies and motivational quotes about cutting out toxicity and choosing yourself first. Anyone who didn't know her would think she was glowing with freedom. But I knew the look in her eyes too well, beneath the mascara and filters she was crumbling. One evening after another 12-hour day split between cafe and hotel shifts, I unlocked my apartment door. The quiet smell of home cheap dish soap, old laundry detergent, the faint sweetness of Luca's shampoo wrapped around me as I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the couch. Exhaustion pressed down on me like lead. I felt its weight in my chest, in my bones, in the fragile place between my ribs where fear and hope lived side by side. The apartment was dim except for the flicker of the kitchen light. Luca was already asleep, curled under his dinosaur blanket, his soft breathing filling the hallway with small, steady proof of life. I stared at the ceiling fan, spinning slowly above me, listening to its low whir. And for the first time since the wedding, tears slipped down my temples into my hair. Not from shame this time, but from grief. A quiet mourning for what could never be. The mother who would never love me the way I needed. The sister who would never see me beyond her own reflection. The family dinners I'd never be invited to. The acceptance I'd spent my life chasing, always just out of reach. In that moment, everything felt unbearably small. I wondered briefly what it would feel like to disappear. To slip out of existence quietly so no one had to carry the burden of loving me. So Luca would never have to sit in a room and hear his mother mocked. So no one could ever hurt me again. But then down the hall, his small, sleepy voice pierced the darkness. "Mama." I sucked in a sharp breath, wiping tears away before they reached my jaw. "Yeah, baby." My voice cracked. He appeared in the doorway, hair-rumpled dinosaur pajamas twisted around his thin ankles. Rubbing his eyes, he whispered, "I had a bad dream." "Can I sleep with you tonight?" "Of course." My voice trembled as I sat up, opening my arms. He padded across the living room in silent shuffles and climbed into my lap, curling his small body against my chest. I wrapped my arms around him, burying my face in his hair. He smelled like strawberry shampoo and sleep-warm, soft real. "I love you, Mama," he mumbled, already half asleep. My tears fell silently into his hair as I whispered back, "I love you too, baby. More than anything." He shifted, getting comfortable, and within seconds his breathing deepened slow and even against my heart. I sat there for a long time, rocking him, gently staring at the dark window where city lights glowed like distant, indifferent stars. My chest still ached. The loneliness still pressed heavy against my ribs. The fear still whispered, "What if this is all there is?" But as I looked down at his peaceful face, his lashes fluttering against his cheek, a deeper voice rose from inside me. Quieter, steadier. This is enough. Because strength isn't about never feeling broken. It's about choosing to get up again anyway. I kissed his forehead, feeling his warmth sink into my bones. That night, as I lay on the narrow couch with Luca snuggled against my side, I thought of Callum. Of his calm voice cutting through the laughter like a blade of truth.